Hello and welcome. I'm Wendy Blom, Executive Director of Lowell Telecommunications Corporation, or LTC, a community media center and TV station in Lowell, Massachusetts. Our mission is to be a tool for free speech in order to empower, connect, and inform all the residents of the city, including its substantial Cameroonian community, and to be the voice of Lowell around the world. We are so pleased to host this very important panel today to help expose what's going on in Cameroon and to lend our support to the City of Lowell's resolution of May 2nd, 2017, recognizing the restoration of the Republic of Southern Cameroon. Human rights abuses there cannot be ignored. And now, I'd like to recognize Fru Nkimbeng, a member of the LTC Board of Directors and a Cameroonian community leader who has organized today's panel. Come on up, Fru.
Thank you very much, Wendy. I am humbled, and it's a pleasure for me to stand in front of you and in front of the whole world, all of you greeting. We are humbled to be here at LTC. I have served on the board of LTC for just about 6 years, and this is the People's Community Television Center. As you all know, LTC, Lowell is a UN of city. And I always put it that way because we have a mixture, a mosaic, as our former mayor puts it, that if you really want to travel around the world, come and spend 7 days in Lowell and you would have traveled all the continents in the world. Lowell Telecommunication is an outreach to the diverse community that serves Lowell. It is my unique pleasure to welcome our distinguished guest from the Republic of Southern Cameroon, our Honorable and His Excellency Chairman, Ayuk Tabe Julius, who will tell the world about what is going on in Southern Cameroon. He is also assisted by his able Secretary General, Mr. Atam Milan, and it's my also privilege to introduce our distinguished historian here in Lowell, and also a former UMass professor and also a former State Department official, Dr. Mehmed Ali.
Well, thank you and welcome everyone to this very important program. If you haven't heard about what's happening in Southern Cameroon, you're not alone. This is an issue, however very important, that has been absent from the major media. It's very unfortunate that this story has not been out in the public forefront. I recently looked at the Washington Post and the New York Times and some of our other major media outlets to find out if there was any coverage about what's happening in Southern Cameroon. The only story from Cameroon was that the country didn't place in the World Cup contest this past few months. So part of our program today is to both get the voices heard and inform and educate not only Cameroonians, but also the entire nation and the world about what's happening. As Fru has already stated, we are joined by two very special guests today, and I wanted to briefly talk about their backgrounds. So His Excellency Ayuk Tabe is the chairman of the Governing Council of the Southern Cameroonian Ambazonia Consortium United Front, also known as SCACUF. He holds bachelor's degrees honors in mathematics and computer science from Keele University in Staffordshire and a master's degree in control engineering from the University of Sheffield in England. Prior to his position as Chief Information Officer for the American University of Nigeria, the chairman worked for Cisco Systems for 5 years as a supervisor overseeing the network of academies in over 23 countries in Western and Central Africa. Mr. Milan Atam, Secretary General of the Governing Council, holds a bachelor's degree in English and French, a master's degree in forced migration, and a second master's degree in public and development management from the Wits School of Governance in South Africa. Mr. Milan is experienced civil military coordinator officer, trained in Sweden and Switzerland, and has worked for the United Nations, supporting several countries in their humanitarian and disaster risk management. He led the Office of Coordination for Humanitarian Affairs in Burundi, where he supervised the pre- and post-elections contingency plans for that country as well. Welcome to Lowell.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First, I think our audience would benefit from a little bit of background on where we have come today. And so I wonder if one of you could talk a little bit about the political history of Southern Cameroon.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I want to thank the community for hosting us. We have just come from the City Council, and the mayor opened his doors to us. And this is not the first time that the mayor has opened his doors to Southern Cameroon. We know that one of our forms has been a guest here before 2 times. And so we are thankful for that. If I ask you what language is spoken in Cameroon, if you ask that question to the average American, they would say French. But that is not true. Because the Republic of Cameroon, or the 2 countries that up until now are led by Mr. Paul Biya, speak English language and French. 20% of that nation speaks English. But it has completely been abandoned and forgotten to the point where across the world today, most people think the Cameroon is a French-speaking country. If it was a French-speaking country, why would it be a member of the Commonwealth? So, just down memory lane, in 1919, when the First World War was fought, the Germans were won in that war by the Belgian, the French, and the British troops. As a result of the spoils of war, the nation was split into 2 and handed over to the French. 80% of it was handed over to the French, and 20% of it was given to the British. The British took their own stretch, which covers 1,500 kilometers from top to down, and they split it into 2. The top part, they named it the British Northern Cameroons, and the bottom part was named the British Southern Cameroons. The top part was associated with the Northern House of Chiefs, or Northern House of Assembly, and the bottom part was associated with was merged with the British, with the Eastern House of Chiefs, House of Assembly in Enugu. We fast forward to 1954. This was in 1919. In 1954, the British Southern Cameroons were becoming very uncomfortable with the Eastern House of Chiefs, and they decided to go back to their own nation. So their parliamentarians walked out of the Enugu House of Chiefs, House of Assembly, and all of them together went to Boya and started their own nation with institutions, the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. In 1959, in that small nation, they had an election where the incumbent prime minister was actually defeated. Dr. Mehmed packed his things out of the prime minister's lodge, and John Gufoncha moved in as the prime minister. I'm giving this background because further down it will be important to understand why our people voted to then go and join the Republic of Cameroon as we know it. On the 1st of January 1960, the Republic of Cameroon became independent from French colonization. On the 1st of October 1960, the Republic of Nigeria became independent from Great Britain. As of that 1st of October, the small stretch of land from the north to the south of the British Northern Cameroons and the British Southern Cameroons remain a trust territory of the United Nations. So on the 11th of February, 61, this British Southern Cameroons was given a choice to vote in a plebiscite to either become independent by joining the French Republic of Cameroon or the British Federal Republic of Nigeria. These 2 nations had been independent before this day. So our people voted, and that's why I brought the story of their moving away, because as of that moment, most of our forefathers asked why the choice of them being independent on their own was not given to them. But the British government at the time thought that they were too small to be independent. And they did that with the complicity of the United Nations. I say complicity because if we were too small to be independent, as we speak today, if we become independent tomorrow and change the United Nations configuration from 193 to 194 nations, we would be more populated than 94 of those countries. With a land surface of 43,000 square kilometers, we are actually a country bigger in size than Holland and Belgium and many, many countries. So let me come back now to the story. On the 11th of February, given those two choices, that your own independence would only be by joining the Republic of Cameroon or the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and knowing that in hindsight they had just left Nigeria a couple of years before, they were caught between a rock and a hot plate. So the only option they did, on a score of 60 to 40, they voted to go and join the Republic of Cameroon. Even at that, you have to see that the ratio, the victory wasn't so massive, because they had the scars of Nigeria. They couldn't go back. That was on the 11th of February. On the 12th of February, the British Northern Cameroons voted overwhelmingly to stay in Nigeria. Because you have to remember, up to this moment, they are still part of Nigeria. It's the British Southern Cameroons that left in 1954. But the condition of us joining the Republic of Cameroon was such that the two nations were asked to go into a conference, which for historical reasons is called the Fumban Conference. It is at the Fumban Conference where those two nations were going to come and iron out their constitution of the two nations and eventually become one nation. But what happened in that conference was very significant, because by the time our forefathers got to the conference, Mr. Ayuk, who was president of the Federal Republic of Cameroon, came with a pre-prepared constitution. And he said, well, you know, we have worked on this constitution, so we might as well adopt it. Thanks to the wisdom of our forefathers, they said, well, if you have worked on it, the least we can do is take it to our own parliament to be debated and accepted. All of this was happening in April of 1961. They took the constitution back home, and before they even had a time to debate it and accept it, 30th of September had caught them, and the United Nations had given Britain the 1st of October as a date when they had to hand over the independence of British Southern Cameroons. And without any preparation, the British invited Mr. Ayuk. He landed in Tico on the 30th of September 1961. And on the 1st of October, his military marched into our country, and they have taken over till today. I say this, that the British invited Ayuk because we have on record the then French president saying in French, "Nous avons reçu un petit cadeau de la reine de l'Angleterre," which translates to say, we have just received a small gift from the Queen of England. Because when our people moved over from Nigeria, they had a police force, but they did not have an army. And so what Mr. Ayuk did on the 1st of October, they lowered the British flag, and he lowered the French flag, the French Republic of Cameroon flag, which had 2 stars at the time. At least they even gave us the favor of adding a second star to show that there were 2 nations. And they called that nation then the Federal Republic of Cameroon. It is important to note that we're talking of a federal republic. And by the federal nature of that country, the 2 nations were coming together, the British Southern Cameroons and the Republic of Cameroon. They came together to form the Federal Republic of Cameroon. Even though the constitutional document cementing that union has never been signed by the United Nations, but it's still symbolic that they got together. A few years later, fate played us a bad blow, because they then had the sense that oil had been discovered in that land. And much of it, as we speak today, 30%, 60% of the GDP of that country is provided, comes from the land of the Southern Cameroons. Once that happened, it became obvious to Mr. Ayuk that if he stayed in the federal constitution, then the British Southern Cameroons were going to manage their resources, at least a huge part of it. And so he unilaterally decided that that country had to become the United Republic of Cameroon. By being united, you now carry all the resources to a central treasury, which he would manage. And as if that's not bad enough, he decided to make that union on the 20th of May, 1972. It's important to note that the 20th of May happened to be his wife's birthday. And that became the national public holiday for the nation. It still is to the Republic of Cameroon till tomorrow. That was in 1972. Our people have been clamoring for any rights. And 56 years later, we have gotten up this time to realize that all our institutions have simply crumbled. They've taken away everything that makes us human. When Mr. Ayuk stepped down as president, Mr. Paul Biya took over in 1982. He's been president for 35 years and counting. But his presidency has dealt us a very big blow. Even the simple institutions he met on our land have been destroyed, abandoned. We had 2 airports when he came over as president. As we speak, you cannot land in a plane on our soil. There is a deep sea port in our land which can dock the biggest flagships. That seaport has been abandoned in preference to a seaport in Douala which is dredged every day. When they got to exploitation of the oil, because most of the oil is on our land, as we speak today, there are 38 oil blocks in operation in Cameroon. 30 of them happen to be in Southern Cameroon. They built a refinery on our land, and they channeled the oil to a depot on their land. All the taxes related to fuel are paid because of the depot, not the refinery. And the pump price of petrol in that country is not the distance of the filling station to the refinery, it's the distance of the filling station to the depot. 56 years later, they have crumbled our legal system, because it just happens that the British have what they call the common law, and the French practice what they call the civil law. And those 2 legal systems are diametrically opposed to one another. In the British common law, you are innocent until the state can prove you guilty. In the civil law, you are actually guilty until you can prove yourself innocent. Over the years, they have gradually changed our legal system to a point where in October or last year, the Minister of Justice actually signed a code of law called Ohada Code of Law in French, and he sent it as an instruction to all the courts of the country that would become the legal code applicable across the nation, in total disregard for the common law that our brothers and sisters have studied and applied. The lawyers called the attention of the government, and this is one of so many letters that they have addressed to the government, signaling the issues that they don't recognize the law courts they find themselves in. They are common law trained lawyers. The magistrate is a civil law trained magistrate. The state prosecutor is a civil law trained state prosecutor. You can't judge a case under those circumstances. When they complained, and it got to a stage where they realized that they couldn't get any headway, they decided to do a protest march. Lawyers in their wigs and their gowns, when they went out on the streets to do a peaceful demonstration, just march, by the time they finished that march, as we speak today, some of their wigs and gowns are still in police custody. They were beaten, they were humiliated, and some of them were arrested. That was in October in 2016. In November, the teachers, also realizing that the educational system of their children was eroding. It was eroding because over the years they have gradually transformed our schools In the process of making them French schools, they have transformed them into what they now call bilingual schools. If this was such a bilingual country, how come we have more bilingual schools in our territory than the rest of Cameroon put together? It is a deliberate attempt to carefully transform us from an English-speaking language and culture to become French people. They call it assimilation. And so when the teachers realize that, as we wake up now, the teacher who teaches chemistry doesn't have English as a language of expression. He's a French person. And then somebody is teaching physics, who's an English-speaking person. And the children cannot relate physics and chemistry because they hear physics in one language, chemistry in another language. So the teachers also decided to write a petition to the government and said, we don't recognize our schools. Our schools are supposed to be English-speaking schools. The bilingual schools are one thing, but these schools are supposed to be English-speaking. And when the teachers did a protest march following the lawyers, they received the same fate as the lawyers. They were beaten, they were molested. The university students who saw the teachers' protest decided to also protest to support their teachers. But the fate of the university students was worse. Not only were they beaten and humiliated, girls were raped. Some of them were brought out of their dormitories and rolled in sewage water. I'm talking about girls. And this was in the view of TV cameras. And up till this moment that we speak, Mr. Biya has not addressed any of those issues. Faced with this reality, our people decided that they were going to pull their children out of school. Our children have not been in school since November 2016. It came at a head start in January, on the 9th of January, when the government insisted that students must go back to school. By this time, the lawyers had got together with the teachers and civil society organizations, and they formed what they then called the consortium. And they asked the government, if you want to redress the situation, you have to talk to the consortium leaders. So, because Mr. Biya's only tools of resolving a situation are money for corruption or force, he used that to good effect at the beginning of January, all in an attempt to quell down the protest and say that schools must start on the 9th of January. But to his shock, on the 9th of January, because our people had been through torture when you come out to protest, we then decided to go on what we now call ghost towns. That's the safest way you can protest, by just staying in your house. And as a religious nation, we encourage our people to read their Bibles, read their Qurans, and just pray. Stay at home. So on the 9th of January, our country was in ghost town. When he then realized that we had got that victory by our people saying they would not send their children to school, he now reluctantly called for negotiations with the consortium. But of course, the negotiations were going to be in his terms. And the consortium leaders said they will not go to any negotiations if 41 students had been arrested in November in those protests. If those 41 students were not released, they were not going to go to negotiations. And this tug of war lasted for a couple of days. And on Wednesday, that would be the 11th of January, 2017, they reluctantly released 21 of those children. And we later on found out that they could not release the 41 because they didn't have the 41 to release. As of that time, 4 of those students had been killed. So they then released 21 of those children, and the consortium asked for the 20. And they were the first to brandish the consortium as being intransigent, that they had shown good faith. If they start the negotiation, then they will release the others. So the consortium went into negotiations on, they got together on, I think on a Thursday and Friday. By the Thursday, they had 19 points on the agenda. By the close of Thursday, they had resolved 4 of those 19 points because the government was trying to resolve them in their own terms. Now, when they realized that our people were not budging and they desperately wanted schools to start on the 16th of January, they then quickly brushed over all the remaining 15 points on the Friday. By the time the meeting finished on Friday evening, they insisted that the consortium leaders should sign the declaration that everything was okay and that they were lifting the school suspension and schools should resume on the 16th. It was evident that they were not ready to solve any problem. They wanted their schools to open. Because, of course, by UNESCO rules, if a school does not go on in a country, if schools don't open for a certain number of hours, UNESCO would cancel the school year for that nation. That's what they have been struggling to save. They don't care about our children. So when the teacher said, no, we are not going to sign any document lifting school ban, besides, we have not seen the 20 children that you promised to release when we got to this stage of the negotiation. They were the same people who started on a Saturday morning and said, the teachers have displayed bad faith and that the negotiations have ended. Again, true to form, they expected schools to start on the 16th of January. And they drummed up everybody, schools will start on Monday. And Monday the ghost came to town and our cities were quiet. When that reality hit them, on Tuesday the 17th of January 2017, at 1 o'clock they banned the consortium. The group with which they had been having discussions was banned. Another very big popular group in our restoration movement, the SCNC, was also banned that same news. And by 5 o'clock that evening, the leaders of the consortium were being arrested. Those are the same people they sat on the desks, on the tables with 3 days earlier. And that situation has brought us to where we are. Our leaders have been, they have been in jail, they were in jail for very many months. At some point in their frustration, they decided to cut internet off. And they cut internet for a total of 94 days in our region. Because they hold the yam and the knife, they decide when to do what. Eventually they restored the internet. And the cry for our people to be released has grown so loud, and they desperately wanted schools to start on the 4th of September. That's this semester. A few days before the 4th of September, they released 53 of our detainees. Now, before that date, we now have hundreds of our people arrested. Many of them have disappeared. We have stories of 12 mass graves that have been closed in the Soa neighborhood of Yaoundé. Of those 53 people who came out, one of them has recounted a story that at some point in prison, they were losing at least 2 people every day. So we know that there are hundreds of our people who will never see. And Mr. Biya doesn't care. Because with everything that has happened for 9 months, he has still not made a statement. He has released 53 of our people. One of the leaders, Mancho BBC, who led the struggle, is still in jail. And all he's interested in, Mr. Biya, is that schools should start. To the point where he sent military officers to go and clear some schools in preparation for those schools to start. So he expected schools to start on the 4th of September, and we said schools will not start. On the 4th of September, schools did not start. And maybe that has brought us a little bit up to speed as to where we are.
Great, thank you. Could you tell us a little bit of background on the Southern Cameroon's consortium, United Front?
Perhaps I can talk to that. I think the chairman has just given an overview of where we came from and where we are, at least until the beginning of this year. Many of the leaders of the protests and of the different organizations, movements had to flee the country as a result of the fact that the regime of Mr. Biya was arresting them. This includes lawyers, teachers, trade unionists, as well as other movements, and found themselves in different parts of neighboring countries, but eventually converged. The idea of a united front came as a result of the fact that for years, our leaders, many of them in exile, had been trying to draw the attention of the people to the fact that all along we constitute 2 separate nations. But I think the difficulty has always been to be organized enough to speak with one voice. And so as a result of the happenings over the late part of the year last year and early this year, the leaders converged in Nigeria. and had a conclave, what is now referred to as the conclave, and talked and decided that the best way to be able to take up the issue of Southern Cameroonians would be to form a united front. As a result, you had different movements pulled together and set up or form what was called the Southern Cameroon's Ambazonia Consortium United Front. And the governing council today is a spin-off of this movement, or of this united front. So the governing council is made up of members of the different of the united front, then that has put together what is now called the executive council, made up of the chairperson, the vice chair, and the secretary general.
Okay, thank you. I recently read an unclassified report about the government blaming some of the current arson incidences against schools, against your organization and the governing council. What are your reactions to this claim?
Well, I would just paint a picture of a school which is prepared for resumption by military people carrying their guns and clearing the school. And by the date the school is supposed to open, it's surrounded by militarized to the kitchen. And then 2 weeks later, with all of those people there, the school is ablaze. You have to ask yourself, who did that? I mean, the government has named us as, they say give a dog a bad name and then you hang it. They would threaten us with any sorts of names, but we have called for a non-violent, peaceful protest, and we are going to keep it that way.
Perhaps to say, following the history, we've just given you a rundown of the modus operandi of this regime: force and corruption. Now, when you look, you consider the fact that from the time the Yaoundé regime marched its army into our territory in 1961, it came in with the military, and our people have known nothing but military force. You wake up in the morning, children going to school, men going to work, they have what they call kale kale. They round up men, throw them on the floor, and they sit there for hours upon hours, checking to see if they've got ID cards. That has been the culture for the past 56 years. Now, when this same regime turns around and blames innocent, unarmed civilians of arson, then you ask yourself, culturally and over 5 decades, with a regime that does not understand the rule of law, who could be guilty? And a clear case in point is the one of this secondary school he's talking about, which happens to be for us, the secondary school, the Sacred Heart Secondary School, is something that we are proud of, because a good majority of some of the best minds of our people were trained and educated in this school. So we hold that school in high esteem. There is no way our people will go and burn something that in lots of ways would constitute, I would say, a national heritage. The Yaoundé regime has done it deliberately because it understands the importance of that school to us.
And I will tell you why it is the Yaoundé regime that did it. No sooner had that school been burnt, before midday the following day, we have a long list of elites in Yaoundé who have volunteered huge sums of money to rebuild the school. Now, that's not the first school that has been burnt. But in this particular case, the school was burnt sometime in the night. By the time we had the stories in the morning, a list of prominent people are volunteering to fix the school, to build a wall around the school. So if they already planned to burn the school and build the wall, they should have just told us.
Is there an attempt by the government to portray the self-determination struggle as a terrorist activity, or your organization as a terrorist organization?
Oh, sure. I mean, we just said now as we're coming here, the Minister of Communication, who has lied from the beginning of this story till tomorrow. Number one, they said there was no crisis, there was no Anglophone problem. And then by the time they accept that there's an Anglophone problem, all the leaders, even the leaders who were released, they were at some point considered as terrorists. So you arrest somebody on terrorism charges, you put them in a military court, and then 6 months later, having been bringing them every month to court and postponing the case, 6 months later, a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court comes and says, well, the government of this country is not even aware of this case. That's how symbolic they tell us we don't belong there, or we don't count for anything. Of course, they call us names, But if you get a chance to look at the structure of the United Front and the governing council, we are led by, look at the audience here, most of us are learned people, academic professors in their rights. 56 years is enough time that they sowed a seed out of our frustration. And now that seed has matured into some very capable, competent people across the world. We've come back to show the system that they cannot rule us forever. And they don't know how to handle that. They can call us names, but we are a very responsible group of people who are just against the injustice that has troubled our nation for so long. And we have, in all fairness, examined our options and realized that the only option available to us is the restoration of the independence of Southern Cameroon. Because the history of the last 56 years has shown bad faith and a deliberate attempt by Mr. Biya to keep us as second-class citizens. And this time, we have stood up as one person to say enough is enough.
Gentlemen, what is the role of the governing council with the traditional leaders in Southern Cameroon?
Well, that's an interesting question because, you see, a habit of overruling people, a habit of undermining the laws of the nation in a country where there's only one authority that counts. In the Republic of Cameroon, only Mr. Biya's authority counts. So he's actually turned even our traditional leaders into people who are not respected. But that's what we are about to restore now. We are about to restore our local authority. As a matter of fact, in the next coming hours, we are going to make a speech in which we restore the authority of Southern Cameroon to our chiefs. So they have been frustrated. Some of them have been bought over the last 56 years. But if 22nd of September was anything to go by, our people have stood up as one person to reclaim their nation. Because on Friday last week, we called for our people to demonstrate. Even though for the last 9 months, we've told them to stay in their homes as a ghost town, we have reached a stage where we wanted our people to stand up again one more time and say, this is our nation and we want to be counted. So we called for a national and international demonstration for last Friday. It coincided with the day that Mr. Paul Biya had to speak at the United Nations. We saw the images that he sat at the United Nations and spoke to empty chairs because none of his fellow presidents could even come and listen to him. But that notwithstanding, outside of the United Nations, we had a mammoth crowd of thousands of Southern Cameroonians who came from across the United States and Canada to come and protest. And they protested well. They even went as far as going to his hotel to continue the protest. Back at home, we asked everybody to support, especially our mothers, especially the grandmothers. And they came out in their numbers, in their thousands, in their millions. And they went to their chiefs to ask for their children to be released. So that's the stage in which we are now, and we are about to completely disregard the authority of Mr. Paul Biya because he is not a president of a foreign nation. And we are going to ask our chiefs to take control of that nation until such a time when the governing council will move in and set up the right institutions and run the country.
So what would you say would be the future steps on reaffirming your sovereignty and self-determination?
Well, future steps, I think the chairman has just enumerated a few. The first thing, and maybe going back to the role of traditional rulers have always had a central role to play in terms of the governance of our people. The Yaoundé regime over years, over decades, deliberately decimated, in fact, emasculated the role of the traditional rulers to the point where going against culture, we were having traditional rulers who were being appointed by the regime, which in all fairness is not the way it's supposed to be. So in terms of steps, is the restoration of the House of Chiefs, or the House of Chiefs, getting traditional rulers to have their place within their community. It's about the rule of law, and by the rule of law, it's very simple things. We've just spoken about the fact that our institutions, our industries were completely wiped out. we are going to try and restore them. But there are a number of things that the Governing Council has put into place to ensure that we establish a nation that we are proud of and that becomes the envy of other nations. So steps. One of the reasons for our visit and traveling has been to try and identify our citizens across the world who have got a wealth of knowledge to come and contribute to the reconstruction of our nation. The second, the Governing Council recently, about 2 or 3 months ago, produced the blueprint. The blueprint basically lays out what we see as the future Southern Cameroonian nation. And we are very strongly of the opinion that whatever we want to put in place, we want to stand out as the African nation that other African nations will have to copy from. So we're looking at aspects of governance, good governance. We're looking at aspects of the rule of law. We are looking at the aspect of something which is which happens to be a bit of a habit on the African continent, is the necessity that power changes hands frequently, and most of all the need to empower our people and ensure that the people be the one to speak. So it becomes a government of the people, by the people. Our institutions, when you look at the schools, again, many of us happen to be products of this system that was set in place to make us think and reflect and operate in a certain manner. A clear example that we were discussing this morning is the fact that a lot of students, our students, when they graduate from school, they are not able to use whatever they have graduated from in real life. So education was made more for going to school, passing exams and getting a certificate, instead of being able to exercise whatever you learned in life. So we are pushing for vocational education, getting our citizens to be able to be self-sustainable, build our own economy through our own efforts. So there are a number of key steps that have been put in place by the Governing Council, ensuring that we identify the right skill set, ensuring that we put in place the proper systems, ensuring that our democratic systems and the rule of law becomes something that is common amongst our people, instituting the role and the place of the House of Chiefs, and most of all, just ensuring that every single one of our citizens plays a role towards this restoration process.
Yeah. What do you gentlemen see the role of the United Nations doing in this entire issue?
Well, that's interesting because we have actually requested audience at the United Nations. We have met at the with some staff of the Security Council, and they know that our file is not closed at the United Nations, and now we are calling them to attend to that file. We have hired the services of a law firm to help us push forward our case, and with them we have been able to have some audiences at the United Nations, and we hope to do more, and we hope that at the end of all of this, the United Nations would accept that we have a very strong case. That's why back in 2010, when Cameroon celebrated its 50th anniversary, the gift of the Secretary General of the United Nations to Mr. Paul Biya was 2 framed maps. We don't know why he sent those 2 framed maps, but we can jolly well interpret that it was because at the level of the United Nations, when they look at Mr. Paul Biya, they see behind him 2 nations. But we at the Governing Council are clear to him that he doesn't govern our nation. He is the President of the Republic of Cameroon, period. We have a nation called British Southern Cameroons, which will eventually be named Ambazonia when we raise our flag up.
And perhaps just to say, the United Nations remains a key player in the restoration of our statehood, but so too is the African Union. And as steps, you asked about steps, is the fact that once we get restored our statehood, we will be moving our country and making it a member of the ECOWAS sub-region. So there are very key steps that we've outlined, but also saying in as much as the United Nations is important and is an important key, is an important player, we are looking also at other players. That is within the region and within our power, but we're talking to a lot of other actors. We are hoping also that the European Union will be able to step in, given the key role that Britain and France played towards the annexation of our territory. We think that Britain and France, as well as the EU, should have a role to play towards the restoration of our statehood. And we've been trying to engage them, and we've been engaging some of them, some of these actors. We were able to engage a bit with the British government. We've been talking to a number of African countries, trying to get them on board, and we are happy with the interest that is being expressed by a whole lot of these actors. And I think that is what has given our people the courage and the courage, but also this newfound life and pride in nationhood that we've seen spring up. The chairman just made mention of the 22nd of September. When Mr. Biya and his cohorts talk about a secessionist group, a terrorist group, what happened on the 22nd of September is testament to the fact no terrorist group, something called hearts and minds. The hearts and the minds of Southern Cameroonian people have been won over by the governing council, and that's why the governing council can ask them to go out and march peacefully, and you have millions of our citizens go out there and do exactly that. You don't do that by being terrorists.
Yeah. You spoke about France. What do you think the role of France is in this crisis? And if you were able to have a meeting with leaders of France, what would you want to say to them, or what would you want to interact with them?
We believe that France wields a lot of authority in Africa, and particularly in Cameroon. And we hope that the French government is monitoring the situation very closely. I say this because of what happened on Friday. 13 people have died on Friday. And we expect the French government to call Mr. Paul Biya to order. These are armless protesters. We have a lot of video evidence where they were marching and they were saying no violence, no violence. They carried tree branches, peace plants, and they were waving them in the air. So if at the close of that day 13 people die and Mr. Biya has not said anything, the French government has to say something. Yes, if the French government wants us to have a discussion around this, of course we will have a discussion. They have an interest to protect their investments in Cameroon. We understand that. Maybe they still have some investments on our side of that border. We will respect that. But it's important that the French government pay attention, because at the end of the day, France is supposed to still be the boss of Mr. Paul Biya. And so we are hoping that with the entry of a new president, he has to look at this very, very objectively. And if Mr. Biya doesn't make a statement on this issue, as the days go by, it's getting worsening and scary, because there's a potential of a real genocide that might happen on the 1st of October. As we speak, he has deployed almost half of his military to our region. Now, why are you deploying a military to a region where the people have always been armless? They've always only stood up to ask for what is rightfully theirs. So our fear, and I'm happy we are having this conversation here, and I hope not only on Facebook, we would spread this as fast as possible, as wide as possible, because our real fear is the potential of a genocide committed by Mr. Paul Biya in the days to come.
Is the United Front interested in seeing a referendum be held so that people can really voice their opinions about the future?
That would be a very fair exercise. I mean, if the United Nations were to organize a referendum by our people, we would prefer that. Is a good shot. I mean, because as much as we are saying that most of our people want to go, and if Friday was anything where they saw millions of people on the streets, if the United Nations wanted to do something that would give them credibility, or France, we would love them to call a referendum yesterday.
Who else in the international community do you see as important in this entire conversation?
Well, we mentioned the European Union, and we had a meeting in Brussels a few weeks ago. We also expect that a country like Nigeria, which is right next to both Cameroon and the Republic of Southern Cameroon, Nigeria should play a part. We expect the African Union as a union to be part of it. As the Secretary General just said, we expect ECOWAS to be strong player. Cameroon is only a Commonwealth nation because of our part of the nation, and so we are expecting that the Commonwealth of Nations, the Queen would order the Commonwealth of Nations to look into this situation.
Let's talk for a minute about development in Southern Cameroon. So what is the state of the built infrastructure and the economy and government support and resources to that region?
Let me give a small statistic. Mr. Paul Biya comes from a region of the Cameroon that has less than 2 million people. The Southern Cameroon has 8 million people in 2 regions now. One of the regions had, for the 2017 budget this year, had, let's say, it had 43 billion. Let's just say in terms of dollars, let's say $43 million, just for the sake of the percentages. And the other region had 41 million. Mr. Paul Biya's region with 2 million people had 123 million. So the budget he allocated for his region, which is less than 2 million people, is more than the budget allocated for 8 million people. Ours formed 75% of the budget he allocated for his region. And that's why over the years, our institutions have crumbled. We have nothing. As a matter of fact, even those institutions that were functioning, we had a power company, we had an electricity corporation that has been disseminated. It doesn't exist at all. As a matter of fact, we now depend solely on the national grid, which is powered from their end. We had a bank. The bank has crumbled. We had airports. They don't exist again. Every of our institutions that we held very proudly, we had a cooperative society. Our cooperatives nurtured our agriculture, coffee, cocoa. Those things don't exist again. We have no identity because of the way he has systematically transferred us from a people who were proud of being the British Southern Cameroons to today. Our children don't even know who we are. So it's systematic. And their plan is eventually, if we don't hold the ship now, tomorrow we would have no belonging to where we came from.
And it's quite deliberate. It's important to emphasize that it's deliberate. It's not mere neglect. It's deliberate. To the point where talk about electricity, it gets to a point where we are entirely dependent on the Republic of Cameroon for our electricity, and it holds for everything to even traders on the roadside. If you have to travel from the one part of my country to the other, from the south, from the northern part of the country to the southern part of the country, you travel, there are no roads that link the northern part to the southern part. You have to travel across the Republic of Cameroon to come to the southern part. And in the process, whatever expenditure and spending you're doing, you spend on the other side of the border. So everything is so well planned and well calculated to the point where we have been completely emasculated. And where we are, it's not so much an issue of language or culture. It's an issue of the complete eradication of a people as a people. And that is something that we cannot allow. And where we stand, we're pushing back, we're taking back our territory, we're taking back what is ours, and we are more than capable of reconstructing it.
I wonder if you could both talk about the status of the freedom of the press in Cameroon at this juncture.
As it stands, Mr. Biya's government does not respect it. There's no press freedom. I think as of a few days now, we still have a BBC journalist that was locked up. I mean, over this crisis, his government has locked up journalists, even of international caliber. Of course, the local journalists, at some point, the chairman of the Communications Council actually issued a statement, like giving directives as to what the journalists could report or not. I mean, that's how bad it is. They tell you the editorial line for a private newspaper. They've shut down radio stations. As a matter of fact, one of our key leaders, Mancho BBC, who's in jail now, is a journalist. He led this revolution. He had a chat show. That radio station has been closed down since January. So, we just got word of another journalist of Equinox Television who was trying to explain our situation. And rumor has it that his dismissal was ordered by the Prime Minister's office. This is a private TV network. And a journalist sits there and analyzes this situation because he's giving credence to our case. He's making this case for our restoration. He has been fired.
We only have just a few minutes left, and we again want to thank our audiences for their participation in this. Do you have any final thoughts you want to contribute?
You want to go first?
Well, final thoughts. I think for me it's one of hope, but also of trepidation. The fact that we as a people have finally stood up after so long and we're taking our place amongst nations is one that gives hope. There is pride in nationhood, in a nation and of a people. That is there. But I'm also aware that the task ahead of us is not an easy one. Perhaps just a quick message to say, continue to encourage our people and say, let's stand together and push together until we get to the finish line. We cross the finish line. But also appeal to our friends, both locally and internationally, to say, the world, no nation is an island. In as much as we are determined as a people to take this thing to the very end, we are going to need friends. And we are opening up and asking all our friends and say, come along, help us. There are opportunities. Southern Cameroon offers opportunities that you would hardly find anymore on the continent. For all the neglect and destruction of our infrastructure, in lots of ways we see it as a blessing, because Southern Cameroon in the 21st century with almost no infrastructure basically opens up a very, very level play field for all kinds of opportunities. And so there is opportunity, investment, and this is not limited to Southern Cameroonians. We are going to build an inclusive nation, and that goes to everybody.
Mr. Chairman, we just have about a minute left.
I would want to thank you for inviting us here, and I want to say a message to our people back home. You have to remain strong because we can see the finish line. And I'm calling on all our brothers and sisters in the diaspora to get ready to go back and rebuild their nation.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, and thank you for watching. And please be attuned to future developments in this issue, which is a very important one that not only affects Cameroon, but really affects the rest of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you.